Bonanza Creek Ranch has had 2 people accidentally shot on a movie set by a prop gun. We need help immediately. Bonanza Creek Ranch. Come on.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The 911 call from script supervisor Mamie Mitchell is like a peek into the inner workings of the Rust set. We get a sense through the call of a crew member in situ, raw, unfiltered, speaking her heart, speaking her mind, while the emergency is still playing out. You can't get much more authentic than this. Bear in mind, when this call was made at 1:50 or 10 to 2 on October 21st, the cinematographer that had been shot point blank was still alive and still fighting for her life. Now, the purpose of this episode isn't to simply play back the 911 call. I'm sure many of you have heard it many times. I will put a few links in the description so you can listen to the 911 call. There are different versions of it, which is quite interesting. But the point of this is to review the 911 call almost like a narrative, interpret what is going on, and then get a sense of some insight. Where does this 911 call take us when we read between the lines? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. You can subscribe by clicking on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. To get notifications, hit the notification bell. And let's get started. So, what happened during the 2-hour lunch break? What happened before this 911 call? And I think this is an area that has not been explored very much. According to the director, Joel Souza, the crew prepared the scene, that's scene 118, in the church before breaking for lunch at 12:30. It's not clear what preparing the scene entailed, but it may have been shifting the pews inside the church, setting up artificial lighting outside, focused on the windows, so there would be this appearance of an almost dusty yellow light coming through the church windows at the far end of the church. This preparation likely also included testing several camera angles. What I want to emphasize here is how much detail and care and precision goes into, or ought to go into, a single moment, a single frame in the film. And you have all these crew members that are painfully working, doing their duty, taking care to make sure everything is just right. Everything is scripted, and the various actors and crew members all have their marks and their roles to play, and it's all choreographed at certain times, and all of it is like a dance. And effectively, a lot of care and sensitivity goes into creating a single fictional moment with maximum emotional and visual impact, right? And that we really want to emphasize is that there's all this care going into creating a single fictional moment, and what they're trying to do is get the maximum out of each moment, the maximum visual impact, and then you put all of these moments on camera together, edited together, and that is your movie at the end of the day. And you hope that putting all these pieces of the puzzle together, your movie is going to be moving. It is going to resonate. It's going to have an impact with your audience, right? So the other thing to emphasize is the length of time of the lunch break. 1 hour for lunch is quite a while. Quite a lot can happen during that time. And since the 911 call came in at 1:50, 10 to 2, just 20 minutes after the lunch break ended, it suggests that the crew walkout at the start of October 21st wasn't the only significant factor leading up to the incident in the church. The lunch break was too. The lunch break was also a significant factor. And as can be overheard during Mamie Mitchell's 911 call, the crew weren't getting on like a house on fire, specifically during lunch immediately prior to the accident.
I was sitting at a table doing my lunch report, and Helena walked by and flashed her gorgeous smile at me. I'm never going to forget that. She was a great collaborator on the set and my new friend. She was pure light. She just had beautiful energy. After lunch, I went inside the...
So that is Mamie Mitchell during a press conference describing lunch, right? Her description is really just about filling in a report and then also having this encounter with the late Elena Hutchins. Interestingly, not all of the 911 call transcripts have the part where Mitchell complains, not to the operator, but to someone unseen. I don't want to say off camera, but someone off mic in a way, about the effing AD. It's a disparaging reference to the assistant director, Dave Halls. I'm not going to play that clip here, but you will be able to hear it in some of the 911 clips that are in the description. And so what it is, it's a brief expletive-laden rant where she complains, this is during the 911 call, that Halls, who had just been asking her for revisions to the script over lunch, was to blame for the incident in the church. So during the 911 call, she's emotional and she's blaming him. And so I'm going to try and repeat what she said without using the expletive. She says to someone unknown, off mic, okay, and this effing AD that yelled at me at lunch asking about revisions, this another expletive, starting with an M and it's got an F in it. And then she said, did you see him? And it sounds like she says, coming over to the table and yell at me, right? And one wonders whether the person she's addressing did see that. The point is that she's inside a 911 emergency call and she's swearing, and the swearing is directed at someone she feels is clearly to blame. Now, what we want to know are what the revisions were specifically, who called for them, what did the revisions call for just prior to this incident? Also, who called for them? Whose idea was it to change the scene in the church in a particular way? Was it Helena's, or was it Baldwin's, the producer and lead actor, who instructed Lena, who instructed the AD, who in turn instructed Mitchell? It's a question. Obviously, Elaine is no longer here to give her side of the story, and so of the original 4 that may have been party to these last-minute script revisions, only Baldwin, Halls, and Mitchell are left, as far as we know. The other thing that's hard to miss is that there's no love lost, apparently, between Mitchell and, in her words, the effing AD. And AD is a reference to the assistant director. Bear in mind, it was during the lunch break when everything was seemingly okay that she says he approached and apparently yelled at her. In the brief aside during the 911 call, Mitchell mentions the AD Halls yelling at her twice. And this is obviously important enough to mention during the 911 call, and yet she doesn't seem to mention it when she provides her account of lunch on camera on around about the 17th of November. Now, I've had a few folks who have worked on sets tell me, I don't know anything about what goes on. You know, if you're not part of the crew, you won't understand. Well, I'm a photographer myself. I've worked on fairly big shoots simultaneously with other photographers, with other videographers, often shooting things like vehicles and so on. So it does have that element of video footage and lighting and everything. And I've also interviewed movie directors. I've also interned for a major advertising agency and written briefs that were actually approved and used in commercials. As a photographer and writer myself, I understand the creative process and the pressure in wanting to render a particular scene based on a set of instructions for a client, but also given that there's a certain artistic perspective or license that you as the creator, as the photographer, want to convey, and trying to balance what is wanted by the client by what you are trying to communicate, that X factor that is beyond perhaps what's in the brief. In any event, these apparent veterans of movie sets may say there's nothing unusual about swearing at a fellow crew member the way that Mitchell was here, or that the amount of stress, something that I tried to emphasize in the previous video, can be a factor, because they'll say a certain amount of stress is normal in a difficult setting. But there's also a certain amount of stress that's healthy and normal, and then there's a certain amount of stress that causes anxiety, that's not helpful, that's not safe. You might know a thing or two about movie sets, but this is true crime. This is reality. This isn't about life inside a movie set. This is about criminal liability, potentially. There are quite a few lawsuits that are going on, and this is about, did someone do something wrong or not? Not about how normal a vibe is on set. It's about what wasn't normal. And in all the 911 calls I've studied, I'm talking about beyond this case, I've seldom come across one where someone is dying and someone is already swearing to a third party, blaming a third party during the call. And if you think that's normal, great, but it's not normal in the 911 calls I've analyzed. The closest thing I've come to folks talking during an emergency call is the John Benet Ramsey case, where it's believed by some that Patsy didn't cradle the phone correctly after hanging up on the operator pretty abruptly. And she's thought to be talking to a man and a boy in the background immediately afterwards. That's still not the same as conversing with them while on the line during an emergency, and even less so, swearing over the phone. The most Patsy says, and she's a very dramatic person, full of pageantry, is, "Oh my God."
Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God.
And so that brings us to quite an interesting area. It's the duty of care we have as citizens when we call in an emergency. And I do think one's got to ask, why is it that the script supervisor called 911? Who decided it should be her? Did it make sense that she should call, or would it have made more sense if someone else did? Ideally, Baldwin, I think, should have made the call, and if he was in shock, then Halls. If they didn't call 911, who did they call? It seems almost incomprehensible that the script supervisor seems to get snippy with the 911 operator, unless I've misheard or misinterpreted. And then shortly after making the call, she hands it over to someone else, ignoring the operator's request to go through a series of questions. So she doesn't really even complete the call from the 911 operator's perspective. Think about it. Someone's life is literally on the line. Someone else is injured, right? Okay, but I'm not going to answer certain questions. And so she does start off very well. She starts off getting to the point. She says, Bonanza Creek Ranch, and the operator starts off by saying, what is the location of your emergency? And she answers it immediately. Bonanza Creek Ranch, we've got 2 people accidentally shot on a movie set by a prop gun. We need help immediately, Bonanza Creek Ranch. And then she says, come on, right? What is the come on for? The operator responds by asking Mitchell to stay on the line. Then she says it again. She repeats it quite a few times, asking Mitchell to stay on the line, and ultimately Mitchell doesn't stay on the line. And that wastes time. It wastes time when you have one person getting or giving first-hand information to an operator and kind of getting on the same page, getting on the same wavelength, and then you hand the phone to somebody else, and now you've got to kind of go through all of that again. You've got to get on the same page. That wastes time unnecessarily in an emergency. And so, just as in the Ramsey case, where does anyone have to be when the emergency medical services are en route? What do you have to be doing that is a bigger emergency? What is so important that is more important than somebody else's life? What else is there to do except help the injured? You're making a call, you're asking for help, so make the call and ask for help. And stay on the call when the emergency medical services ask for information. In Patsy Ramsey's case, when she was asked about when something happened, she immediately seems to talk over the operator and then throws down the phone. Anytime you have these sorts of anomalies in an emergency call where something feels off, it's important to pay attention. So what's confusing listening to the Russ 911 call is it's not even clear when the supervisor is speaking to the operator or speaking to someone else. And when it's not clear in that way, one's got to wonder, did the operator know when she was being spoken to? And that's, again, not a good situation. Her voice, this is the supervisor, is also fairly matter of fact, both when she's speaking to the operator and to somebody else. Until she's asked questions she doesn't seem to want to answer. She actually sounds irritated at certain points. At one point, the supervisor brackets each word where she's interrupted talking, and then she says, from a movie gun shot, as if she's about to lose her patience with the operator. And this is just 30 seconds into the call. So what I want to emphasize here is how little detail and how little care and how little precision went into every second of this emergency call. It's not scripted, it's reality. It's what's your name, what did you see, and can you take these instructions now to possibly save a life? In a film, actors and crew members all have their marks and their roles to play. In an emergency, believe it or not, there's also a team who are there to do their jobs. The ambulance driver, the doctor, the 911 operator. And so, I don't know, there seems to be something, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it is contempt, arrogance, a sense of being better than somebody else. But calling someone you don't know, the 911 operator, and within seconds saying, come on. And it's not really meant in a, you can definitely make the case that in an emergency, you don't need to be polite, you shouldn't be polite, there's no hello, how are you? But by the same token, it's unnecessary to be rude to the operator. You can be rude just in terms of quickly conveying an emergency situation, but without that come on, if that makes sense. And you might say I'm being unfair in making this comparison, but if so much care and sensitivity goes into creating a fictional moment in a movie where you're trying to have maximum emotional and visual impact, you're trying to communicate as clearly and emphatically some fictional scenario, why is there so little care? Why is there so little focus? Why is there so little attention? Why is there so much distraction in a real life emergency? Is it so hard in 1 minute just to settle down and to answer the question of someone you have called to render aid? I mean, that's all you've got to do. It's not as though you've got to run laps or do push-ups or something. All you've got to do is stop, listen, focus, and answer a few questions. And that brings us to 911 protocols. There are protocols on a movie set. There are also protocols that emergency service people have got to follow. And you would imagine when you are calling, not necessarily because a friend of yours has been injured, but a colleague, that it's all the more important to be professional. You are at work, you are in a work situation, a work colleague has been injured during the course of work, and isn't it part of your work to do your work in terms of caring for them, a duty of care? And also, isn't there a protocol in calling an emergency in, just as there's a protocol from EMS's perspective, from the perspective of a 911 operator? You know, the police have got a protocol when they arrest someone. There are protocols in court, right? There are protocols on a film set. And so we are talking in this case about, were protocols on this film set violated? And you have someone from this film set calling in, and are they honoring the protocols that are being imposed upon them within an emergency? So when the operator first asked the supervisor to identify herself, to give her name, the supervisor answers the question. She gives her name. Now, bear in mind, as I say, we're talking about safety and protocol on a set. This is about safety and protocol during a 911 call. How do you think the supervisor is doing? Asking a caller on a 911 call to identify themselves is 911 101, right? It's basic procedure. Something else that's basic procedure is just giving the basic information, just being helpful. Where are you? What happened? What is the situation? Who are the people? What is going on? At about 1 minute into the emergency call, Mitchell can be heard blaming Dave Halls. She doesn't mention his name, but what she does say is, quote, he's supposed to check the guns. He's responsible for what happens on the set, end quote. And this is heard during the 911 call. In effect, she repeats the same thing twice. He's responsible, right? Well, right now, she's responsible in terms of the 911 call. She's responsible for the lives that are sort of hanging in the balance. She's responsible just to communicate what is going on. And I don't want to be too mean here. Obviously, it's a chaotic situation. She possibly is in shock. What has happened is traumatic, right? But it is also a situation where all you've really got to do is answer questions. It's not that hard, right? I don't know how the procedure normally works in this situation, but if a revision is made to the script, and if it has to do with a firearm, what happens after that? What's the next step? What's the protocol? Must the script supervisor speak to someone and inform them of the changes, or is that up to the assistant director? And who talks to the armorer? Did anyone? At this point, the 911 operator has to interrupt Mitchell's conversation with somebody else in order just to clarify how many people are injured. This should have been clarified in the first 5 or 10 seconds. She gives some information and then continues to give information, perhaps into the radio on set. At this point, she makes a reference to being back in the town. Once again, the operator breaks in to ask about injuries. Mitchell sounds annoyed now to be interrupted. And of course, the answer is the injuries are serious to both victims and there is serious bleeding. Mitchell seems to say something like, I don't know, but obviously you need to give that information in the situation. And so it would have made more sense to say, I'll find out, or I'll have someone, I'll stay on the line, I'll have someone run to the door or go closer and find out, right? I'll have someone radio and communicate, I'll get the answer for you. In an objective sense, 2 injured people bleeding, it is important to have EMS communicating what needs to be done. So this is the situation. People have serious wounds and are suffering blood loss. And it's a ongoing situation that requires a certain kind of specific medical care. Would you know instinctively what to do in a situation like that? And so this situation is actually taking place, and the advice from EMS could be something that could have saved a life. And literally, if Elaine is bleeding, could have been stemmed effectively. Who knows, it could have saved her life. And so every second counts. Every communication counts. And so the rest of this call isn't much better. It's, I don't know and I can't tell. And so you kind of want to say, can you find out? Can you do something? Can you find out? Can you stop talking to this other person and can you find out what is going on? That's kind of the instinctual feeling I've got. Now, it is possible other people are also speaking to EMS and there is a medic on scene. That's certainly the case. But it's at this point that Mitchell simply hands the phone to an unknown male and thus ends her contribution in terms of her emergency call for help. If anything, the unknown male sounds even more reticent and reluctant to be on the phone. As the unknown male hesitantly answers questions, Mitchell can actually be heard chattering almost indistinctly in the background. And she's saying something about camera crews. Now, the point of this episode isn't really to point the finger at Mamie Mitchell or to blame anyone. It's simply to ask a much broader question. And it's to say, if you examine this 911 call in isolation, if you had to take this call and kind of put it in a box and put an evidence label on it and say, just ask the question, based on listening to this call, how well organized would you say it was? In other words, how well do you think the crew member did in dealing with this 911 call compared to, say, other 911 calls? Do you think they got 3 out of 10? Do you think they got 5 out of 10? Do you think they got 7 out of 10? Do you think they did as the best job they could possibly do? Do you think they got 10 out of 10? What do you think? Do you think they did well or not so well? Before answering, consider this is an emergency with a full quota of crew on hand. It's not just one person calling in an emergency. You've got a full set of people, and each one's got a different role. Each one's got a different position within a hierarchy of people who've got different roles to play. So anyone could be delegated this role to call 911. And if you say, well, this is a really important person, but they've got so many other things to pay attention to, well, isn't there another person that is a really good communicator that can handle stress, that is perfect for this situation, that can communicate what needs to be communicated, right? So in a situation like this, somebody needs to take charge. The best person can be delegated a task in order to sort it out. And isn't there a protocol for emergencies? I'm talking about within the production, for who needs to take control, who needs to handle emergencies, and who should call them in. So do you get my point? In an emergency with a whole crew on hand assigned to different roles, why, from the operator's perspective, is communication so abysmal, so unclear, so haphazard, and so unhelpful? And so one has to wonder, if the 911 call was handled this way, unprofessionally, some might argue, how were problems and niggles on set dealt with? Was it really one big happy family getting along like a little house on the prairie? Or were certain personalities really chafing against one another, leading to tension, broken communications, just like in this call, and eventually mistakes? So I'm not going to take it further than that. I do have the entire transcript of the ABC interview with Alec Baldwin, and we want to do some statement analysis on that. So watch this space, look out for more coverage and analysis on that ABC interview. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.